If you can't already tell by profiling us, Jackson and I have ADHD.
Millions of Americans can't fill their prescriptions amid a nationwide shortage.
Others who abuse the so-called study drug, the medication can be life-ending.
U.S. prescriptions more than doubled in the past 12 years.
Everyone does something to supply themselves with dopamine. As a former Adderall user, I was incredibly anti-study drug when Jackson first called me. Today we're talking about Modafinil, Adderall, things, these limitless pills.
You know how they say that we can only access 20% of our brain? This lets you access all of it.
These limitless pills, quote unquote, that could supposedly give us the focus we need so that we can do what we're supposed to do in the world. Hello and welcome to another episode of Self-Help Me, the show where we self-help you, self-help yourself. I think a lot of really successful people we admire have these secret things like ADHD, dyslexia. A lot of entrepreneurs have dyslexia. And the way that you choose to handle that energy can have a big implication in your life. Jackson, why don't you introduce yourself and your experience with the label known as ADHD?
Hey everybody, my name's Jackson. I actually got diagnosed with inattentive ADD about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. And not wanting to self-diagnose, I went to a doctor, and then a lot of issues that I've had my entire life started to make sense. For most of my life, it's felt like I fought against my own brain. I feel like it's hard to get me going on tasks that are monotonous and repetitive, which is normal for everybody, but for me it was like to an excess where I had to wait until 10 minutes before something's due to actually sit down and even look at it. And it always felt like every single day of my life I was fighting my own brain to such a degree that I was actually willing to give medication a shot. I recently got prescribed Modafinil, 100 milligrams per day. The shift that I've had is profound. Modafinil has been pretty life-changing in just the 10 days that I've been doing it. My capacity to focus on one thing at a time is amazing. For me, it was a last resort. I'm being very cautious with it. I have a lot of people in my recovery program that I've told about it. I'm having friends monitor me and what I'm doing with it to make sure that I'm not relying on a pill to solve all my problems. It has helped me a lot. It's raised like my base foundation of like focus and like the capacity to take the next step. Instead of fighting my brain for 3 hours to get going in the day, it takes me a 20-minute run and like a 10-minute meditation. Like I still have to do the things that I know are good for me in order to get into that place to stay focused. But once I'm focused, I'm there for much longer.
So that's a great personal anecdote. Modafinil is not the most extreme thing people with ADHD take. I took Adderall at the maximum dose. But as it turns out, Adderall is 1 milligram away from methamphetamine, and it's speed, it's an upper. The fact that we are prescribing it to high percentages of classrooms, like my brother was in a class where 7 of 11 kids were prescribed Ritalin, which was the big thing before Adderall. Pretty much the same kind of thing. I've taken Ritalin. The claim is if you don't have ADHD, you'll feel more euphoric. If you do, you'll feel sort of normal. I can't dispute that. But what I can say is for me, it was just basically speed. I started taking more and more, snorting it. I had a table where I'd crush it up, and then we started taking it before we partied. For a year, I was in a basement just losing weight, living for this substance, which did keep me going. I got through school. I eventually dropped out and had to go back and finish without Adderall, with just Devon energy. And that was an interesting, empowering experience, I would say. At the time, I thought this thing makes me want to do everything, and I will be a rapper, I will go to the moon, I will graduate from Harvard. And I did a lot of things, but in sort of a singular manic state. Quitting that was very difficult for me. I ended up running a marathon and rediscovering sort of the bodily engines for creating focus. As someone who's taken Adderall, I've actually had moments completely sober where I'm so in the zone that my own body creates the exact same feeling of that speedy high. And I'm like, oh, I remember this. Did I take Adderall today? What's going on? But that's just the brain's natural ability to supply dopamine primarily. And so a lot of these drugs, when it comes to ADHD, are based on the philosophy that if I give you the dopamine that you need at the beginning, you'll be sort of full. And so your dread, your overstimulation, your worry will be tempered to the point where you can continue on. And there's another theory that says, actually, dopamine works the way it does for a reason. It's only supposed to be there as a reward. So if you give yourself the reward, like I did, sometimes why would you do anything if the reward is right there, you know?
And that's something I've been going through a little bit, because my lifestyle went from fighting my own brain to get any little thing done for about 2 to 3 hours during the day. And then once I got that thing done, I got this dopamine hit where I'm like, oh, cool. I realized once I started taking modafinil, all of a sudden I felt good. Like I felt not high, not crazy, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym and then I'm gonna go and meditate and do some journaling and do some reading. And then I realized my number one meaning and purpose to life was to fight my own brain to get anything done to get a dopamine hit. Suddenly, all of my definitions for life, which was to fight and fight and fight to get a dopamine hit, was gone. I started thinking more about charitable causes. I started thinking about more purpose-driven reasons to do the things that I want to do.
That's what convinced me, because let me just say, as a former Adderall user, I was incredibly anti-study drug when Jackson first called me. But then this idea coming up of, what if you're not constantly striving for the next sort of brownie point in your brain in the form of dopamine? What if you're not always seeking? That starts to sound a little bit zen to me. If we remember that we're full, we can go through the day with sort of a relaxed poise and flow state and not overthink things too much, because our anxiety is reduced. We're not shaking or quivering. It's like if you see somebody who's thirsty, you give them a glass of water. The idea is if you see somebody who's lacking dopamine, giving them enough dopamine so they can calm down and pick a path forward. We're both in agreement in that dopamine is good. We need it. And for me personally, modafinil, because it's not amphetamine, I was interested in it as a different lane than Adderall. If you ask me if you should do Adderall, I say no. One thing I find when people need study drugs, I ask them to take a step back and look at your life and go, am I doing things that are just boring? Do I want stimulation every day? Do I want to, experience something new because newness is great? Mm-hmm. Your body might have some wisdom to it and go, yeah, I'm making you feel like crap because you need to quit this job and rethink your entire life. When I got off Adderall, I took a long time to get simple jobs and the more complicated jobs, and then start doing video and get paid for video. And I started teaching, and I got in a relationship, and it was like, instead of taking something to make me feel better, I was designing a life that made me feel better. That's a win-win no matter what. So if there's any chance that you can get your motivation as a reward for overcoming yourself and doing the things that you really know you ought to do but you're terrified of, that's the system working as it should. When the reward is coming from a pill, a donut, and a cigarette, and it's so overwhelming and you can take so much of it, I fell into a trap. Not everybody will.
I'm glad I got sober, and I'm glad that I faced myself and had to find some level of spirituality before I took medication. I'm glad that I have like a toolkit for life that I can pick up to help myself feel better. It's after a foundation of like struggle and sobriety and spiritual learning and self-help programs and like a network of friends that I can lean on. Like there's a lot that goes into it outside of just taking a pill that gives you a little bit more executive functioning. It's not like life just suddenly is perfect.
And stop wanting life to be perfect, because that is awful. That's like what real hell is. you just go to a perfect world where everybody's like, I don't see what the problem is. I'd love to serve you. Here we go. Blah, blah, blah. No, the chaos of life is super engaging.